Hey y'all, welcome back to the next video with my newest Mustang, Kirby. This is day 2 of training for him. I spent some time petting him and messing with the halter before clipping the lead rope on, and was able to do so with no issues. On day 1, Kirby started learning how to give to halter pressure and the building blocks to leading. He also learned how to accept touch on both sides of his neck. Here he had just gotten a little scared from me moving my hand too fast, but he quickly realized that I wasn't reaching out to hurt him. He retained very well from the previous day and was pretty much willing to get right back to where we had ended. So I started using what he had learned on day 1, which was giving his face to the halter and yielding his hindquarters away from me as I walked towards him, to begin working on leading. This is how I build up to leading. And because he wasn't quite understanding it yet, I decided to break it up for him, and so I went back to sending him around me in a circle, which helps unlock some forward motion, and then asking him to yield his hindquarters away from me and stop. I begin by showing him my finished cue, which is standing in front of him and holding that right hand up with the lead rope, and end up having to go behind him and use pressure behind to explain to him what I'm asking him to do, and eventually he'll figure out from the first cue what I'm asking of him. But in the beginning I do have to break things down more for him so that he understands. Then I can ask him to lead in sort of a zigzag pattern, which makes it much easier for him than just asking him to walk straight forward. I can then start asking him to follow me, rewarding every time he comes off the pressure. Then I just keep repeating the same process, sending him around me and then asking him to lead for a few steps. It's all very repetitive, but I'll show you a couple clips. Next, I wanted to give him a refresher on the desensitizing we did with the stick and string, starting on his face where he was the most comfortable with it, practicing having ropes go over his ears for when I eventually will halter him, and then just working on putting the string over his body. I like to move them a little in between, getting them used to something new so that they don't feel stuck in one place and they feel like they can move if they get afraid. Another thing I'll do to prepare them for my hand going farther down their body is use the end of the stick and rub them with it so that they get used to that touch and they start to realize that it's not a bad thing. He wasn't bothered by the stick and string very much, but it's very useful to know how they're going to react to touch, especially on their legs, and to prepare them for that feeling before I go to touch them there with my hand. Occasionally, I would still startle him if I went to pet his forehead and he thought my hand was going towards his eye. He also was still wanting to block me from the right side a little bit. As you can see, he's trying to turn towards me. However, he wasn't doing that on the left side, so he's definitely more protective on the right. Now that we've done our desensitizing with the stick, I wanted to see if I could touch a little further down his body than I got the previous day. He was pretty good for me touching his barrel on his left side. However, on the right side, I can only just about make it to the shoulder. He went to spook past me, and I wanted to encourage him that it's okay to keep moving forward if he's scared, and so I did send him forward just a little bit before asking him to stop. I would much rather a horse that moves past me and spooks around me than one that feels like they aren't allowed to do that and turns defensive instead. I would rather him know that it's okay for him to spook. But what I'm aiming to do here is release and back away before he feels the need to spook. So here I start to work on something that will get him even more comfortable with touch. Eventually I want to work up to having both hands on him at the same time. You can see he's a little nervous. He did flinch when I reached out to touch him, and then he looked off into the distance because he was kind of checking out a little bit. So I just gently touched the lead rope to ask him to check back in with me, and I rewarded when he looked at me and started blinking more frequently. This shows me that he's really present in the moment and actually taking in what I'm doing instead of just mentally checking out. Because he is the type of horse to retreat into his shell a little bit, and this can end up creating a horse that tends to shut down, which is not my goal whatsoever. I want my horses to be really relaxed and actually becoming comfortable with whatever we're working on, whatever sort of desensitizing exercise. I don't want to cause them to shut down. I think a lot of people don't realize you can unintentionally cause a horse to shut down if you don't notice these small signs in them. So I'm always paying attention to his expressions and how he is thinking in the moment. What I was doing here, he was a bit unsure about, but I was switching which hand I was petting him with so that I could work up to touching him with both hands at the same time. And to me, he still looks a little bit off in the distance, like his mind is somewhere else. And so that's something I did end up working some more on in future days, making sure that he really was present with me. I learn a lot from watching back my videos and noticing the things that I may not have seen in the moment. So here I think I moved a bit too quickly for it being his right side, which is his more guarded side. And he did spook a little at first, so I just took it back to alternating both hands for a bit so that he could get more comfortable with that. He was still pretty nervous, so I spent some time on it. Since I made him nervous by moving too fast, I did have to take it back a step and spend some time just petting him with one hand and rebuilding that trust again. And after doing that for a little bit, I was able to work my way back up to having both hands on that side. So then I wanted to do some rope work to see if I couldn't get the rope over his front legs and possibly pick up his front feet on that day. And so I start the same way as the stick and string, with it on his face, going over his ears and his neck, and then pretty quickly I can work up to just tossing the rope over him, and he realizes that it's the same thing as the string, and so he's not too fazed by that. And we did the same on the left side. I also did this where I tossed the lead rope while I was already over him and just moved it to different places on him, and did the same thing with the front leg. Because he was so non-reactive to things on his front legs, I thought I might try putting the rope around and see what he did. I normally don't reach around their foreleg to put the rope on. I find that it's easier and safer for me to just toss the rope around and pick it up from the ground, but because he's pretty quiet, I went with this method for him. I've already used the stick to get him used to touch on his legs, but the rope really helps to get him used to the feeling of something wrapping around the same way a hand would when it goes to pick up his foot. And so I do that for a little bit, and then I just have him move with the rope on his foot, where there's absolutely no pressure on the rope. It's just to get him used to the feeling. And then as he's walking and he's already stepping forward with that leg, I start to apply some pressure, and because he's already stepping forward, it helps him figure out what he's supposed to do, which is just to yield to the pressure and put his foot even further forward. This is the best method I've found for getting a wild one used to having their hoofs handled. I find that it's lower stress for them than if I were to just reach down there with my hand, because that scares them even more than just having the rope on their legs. At this point, they know about ropes, they know about pressure. If I've taught them about yielding to pressure well, then they don't have an issue figuring out that they're supposed to move off the pressure of the rope. It's a way that I can help explain to them what I want them to do a little better than just putting my hand down there and hoping for the best. It's also a lot safer for me. If I have a horse that's more reactive to touch on their front legs and finds this whole process a lot scarier than Kirby did, I'll spend a lot more time on this and take more steps, and I'll usually break this up over the course of a couple days so that it's lower stress for the horse and ends up with a nicer result. However, Kirby was taking this all in stride pretty well. He got a little nervous at some points, but for the most part he was very good, and it was a good start. I don't aim to get them completely solid, picking up their front feet, picking them out with a hoof pick or anything in the first couple days. I just do a little bit of work on this each day and get them a bit better with their feet. The reason I start doing this so soon in the gentling process with horses like Kirby is because I find that it's a good way to build trust with handling a vulnerable part of the horse's body, proving to them that you don't intend to hurt them. I'm setting a bad example on YouTube because I normally go through way more steps before picking up a foot. But when I know a horse is quiet like this, sometimes I just gotta do it. So here's my disclaimer that not every Mustang, in fact most Mustangs, are not as good with their feet in the beginning as Kirby. He's been one of the easiest Mustangs that I've had as far as gentling and handling their feet. He definitely has his own unique difficulties and things that I have to work on and learn with him, but he was pretty good for the whole hoof handling process. I was doing all the same steps as the other side. He was getting a little nervous here and backing up, so I wanted to redirect that into a bit more forward motion because I find that's easier for teaching them to pick up their feet. Although here, he was really good with letting me just reach down there. And honestly, I could have done a few more steps with him, but I just wanted to get a hand down to both footlocks, which he was very good about. And so we quickly called it a day for day 2. Well, thank y'all so much for watching Kirby's second ever day of training. This was a really fun one. He's been a really enjoyable Mustang to work with. And if you follow along with our next video, you can see Kirby getting a makeover and getting used to some new training desensitizing tools.